In 1872, a man named George Smith sat in the British Museum, carefully translating a clay tablet pulled from the ruins of ancient Nineveh. What he read made him jump out of his chair. He began tearing off his clothes in excitement, right there in the museum. On that tablet, written 1,000 years before Genesis was composed, was a flood story. A man chosen by the gods, an enormous boat, animals brought aboard 2 by 2, a world destroyed by water. The flood narrative isn't just in the Bible. It's one of the oldest stories in human civilization, and after 150 years of archaeology, we may finally understand why. Let's start with what the Bible actually says, because most people only know the children's book version. God speaks to one man, Noah, and the instructions are specific. Build an ark, in Hebrew, teva. The dimensions given are roughly 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet tall. 3 decks, 1 door, sealed with pitch inside and out. Those are not symbolic numbers. Naval architects have analyzed these proportions and found they match the optimal ratio for stability in heavy seas. A 6.1 length to width ratio, the same ratio used in modern cargo vessels. Noah loads his family, 8 people total, and the animals. Then Genesis 7:11 gives us a timestamp. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. It's a story everyone knows. But here's what most people miss. This story didn't start with Genesis. That tablet George Smith translated, it was tablet and fiends of the Epic of Gilgamesh, written around 1800 BC in ancient Babylon. In it, a man named Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh how the gods decided to destroy humanity with a flood. The god Ea secretly warns Utnapishtim, build a boat, seal it with pitch, bring your family and the seed of all living creatures. The storm comes, the waters rise. After 7 days, the boat lands on a mountain. Utnapishtim releases a dove, then a swallow, then a raven. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Divine warning, one chosen family, a sealed boat, animals preserved, birds sent out to test the waters, a mountain landing. The Atrahasis epic tells an even more detailed flood story. The oldest surviving copy dates to around 1650 BC, the reign of a Babylonian king named Ammi-Saduqa, though the story itself is likely centuries older through oral tradition. In this version, the gods flood the earth because humanity has become too noisy. They can't sleep. The hero is Atrahasis, who builds a boat on divine instruction. And there's more. The Sumerian flood story, fragments of which date back to around 2100 BC, names the flood hero as Ziusudra. Same basic narrative, even older. Flood stories appear in nearly every ancient civilization, from the Hindu account of Manu, to the Greek story of Deucalion, to Native American oral traditions from the Pacific Northwest to the Mississippi Valley. Over 200 flood narratives have been documented across cultures that had no contact with each other. In 1929, British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley was excavating the ancient city of Ur, modern-day southern Iraq. Digging beneath layers of civilization, his team hit something unexpected, a thick band of clean, water-deposited clay. No pottery, no artifacts, no human remains. Just sediment left by an enormous flood. Woolley telegrammed his wife, "We have found the flood." The clay layer was up to 11 feet thick in the main pit, though measurements varied at different points in the excavation. Below it, an entirely different civilization. Above it, the culture that became Sumer. Similar flood deposits have been found at Kish and Shuruppak, which is traditionally the home city of the Sumerian flood hero Ziusudra. But here's the problem. The flood layers at each site date to different periods. They're not all from the same event. What this tells archaeologists is that southern Mesopotamia, the flat river plain between the Tigris and Euphrates, was prone to catastrophic flooding. The entire region sits barely above sea level. When the river surged, entire cities could be buried under water and mud. For people living there 4,000 years ago, a regional flood of that magnitude would have been indistinguishable from the end of the world. Their entire known world was that river valley. But there's another theory that goes even bigger. In 1997, two Columbia University geologists, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, proposed something dramatic. They argued that thousands of years ago, the Mediterranean Sea broke through the narrow land bridge at the Bosporus and catastrophically flooded a massive freshwater lake, creating what we now call the Black Sea. They originally dated it to around 5600 BC, though Ryan later revised the estimate to roughly 6800 BC. The numbers are staggering. They estimated the water poured through with 200 times the force of Niagara Falls. The lake's shoreline expanded by over a mile per day. Entire settlements along its banks were swallowed. Thousands of square miles of farmland, gone in months. In the year 2000, Robert Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, led an expedition to the Black Sea floor. At depths exceeding 400 feet, his team found ancient shorelines, freshwater shells, and what appeared to be man-made structures. Evidence that people had lived there before the flood. It's worth noting that more recent studies, including a 2024 analysis of Black Sea sediment cores, support a more gradual flooding model rather than a sudden catastrophe. The scientific consensus has shifted against Ryan and Pittman's dramatic version, but even a slower flooding over months or years would have been devastating for lakeside communities. If they're even partially right, survivors would have scattered in every direction, into Europe, into the Near East, into Mesopotamia, carrying with them the memory of a world destroyed by water. This could explain why the flood story appears in so many unconnected cultures. Not because it's a myth that spread, but because it's a memory that scattered. Here's what the evidence tells us. The biblical flood account in Genesis is part of a deep literary and historical tradition stretching back thousands of years. The writers of Genesis didn't invent the flood story, they inherited it, but they told it differently. In the Babylonian versions, the gods are petty. They flood the earth because humans are annoying. In Genesis, the flood is a moral event. It's about justice. It's about a God who grieves over what humanity has become. Whether you read this as literal history, as theological narrative built on real catastrophic memory, or as both, one thing is undeniable. Something happened in the ancient world that was so devastating, so unforgettable, that every civilization on Earth remembered it. That's the real history behind the flood. If you want to go deeper into the stories the Bible tells and what archaeology has uncovered, subscribe to the Biblical Archives. Old Testament, New Testament, the real history. Next time, the lost years of Jesus. From age 12 to 30, the Bible says almost nothing, but history might.